Court's session has started. It began this week, and it's already getting interesting. It looks like they're going to further gut the Voting Rights Act, although Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson had some really good points to make. I mean, basically, the Republicans and the North Carolina and Alabama and all these states that are trying to defend their gerrymandering, these extreme gerrymandering, are coming in saying, well, you know, we all need to be race neutral. We need to be blind to race. That's the goal of America, isn't it? And she said, no, these laws were actually passed because race neutral meant white people maintain control and keep out black people because they're the majority and they've, you know, rigged the system in this way. And these laws are designed specifically to give people who are not white an opportunity to participate also, to vote specifically. And, you know, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a real interesting time. But I think the big case that we all need to keep an eye on is Moore v. Harper, which is probably coming up in the next couple of weeks. And Moore v. Harper is ostensibly about gerrymandering. But it turns on this Independent State Legislature theory, the ISL theory. And this Independent State Legislature theory is based on the Constitution saying that the individual states' legislatures shall define the time and place and choosing and the circumstances, you know, under which the electors are chosen. And you know, basically what they're trying to say is that individual state legislators can overrule the will of the voters. Once Republicans have a majority in the state legislature, even if it's by gerrymandering, they can overrule the will of the voters and basically install whatever kind of government that they want. In North Carolina, for example, the vote in North Carolina is pretty much 50-50, Democrat-Republican. In fact, slightly favors Democrats. That's why North Carolina has a Democratic governor. So the statewide vote is 50-50. And yet, out of the 14 seats that North Carolina has in the House of Republicans, 10 of them are Republican. Now, it should be 7, right, if it's 50-50? And you know, if they adopt this independent state legislature theory, the Republicans will simply be able to say, okay, that's it. You know, we run this state, we will run this state forever. And particularly if the Supreme Court goes along with this idea that the legislature, at least with regard to the White House, with regard to the Electoral College, that the legislature can say, you know, yeah, the people of North Carolina voted for, you know, Joe Biden, but we're going to give the vote to Donald Trump. This is what Trump tried to do 2 years ago. He tried to get these states to say, you know, it doesn't matter how the people voted, we're going to give the election to you. He tried to talk Brad Raffensperger into that. He tried to talk Brian Kemp into that. He tried to talk Doug Ducey into that. You know, state after state, he tried. You know, he tried to talk Mr. Voss, the head of the Republican head of the legislature in Wisconsin, into this, basically saying, you know, doesn't matter how, you know, what the voters say. What matters is what the legislature says, because that's what it says in the Constitution. Now, it requires a rather jaundiced reading of the Constitution to come to that conclusion, but hey, a jaundiced reading of the Constitution is nothing new for Republicans. Over at The Guardian, they're writing, a supermajority of 6 unelected ultra-conservative justices, 5 of whom were put on the bench by presidents who did not win the popular vote. 5 out of the 6 of these right-wingers were put on the court by Republicans who lost the election, have aggressively grabbed yet another batch of cases that will allow them to move American law to the extreme right and threaten U.S. democracy in the process. And they're talking about this independent state legislature theory. You know, I wrote about this, geez, 2, 3, 4 months ago. I probably should write about it again. But, you know, the bottom line is that if this case is decided the way that it looks like the Supreme Court is inclined to decide it, certainly it takes 4 votes to get a case of Supreme Court members to accept a case for the court to hear. And so, clearly the 4 conservatives who said, yes, put this on our docket, and it might have been more than 4, but we know that, the threshold is 4 votes, that the 4 votes who said, yes, put this on this docket, they very much are totally, down with the idea of America being run the way that Russia is run by Putin, or Hungary is run by Viktor Orban, or Turkey by Erdogan, or Poland by Duda. I mean, they're saying, yeah, you want to rig elections, that's fine. As long as it's for our side, we're good with that. And this didn't come out of nowhere, by the way. I mean, this movement to rig our elections, to have permanent minority control, white Republican control, minority control, and to integrate religion into the Republican Party, all of these things came out of the white backlash and the white billionaire backlash. Back then it was Fred Koch and the John Birch Society, to the backlash to the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. And that backlash was so deep and so, I mean, I remember the late 1950s, early 1960s, driving around, this country with my family. And this was not in the South. I mean, we took a vacation to Massachusetts once when I was a kid in the late 50s. We certainly drove a lot around Michigan. And I remember these billboards that said, impeach Earl Warren, that were paid for in part by Fred Koch and the John Birch Society. And they wanted to impeach Earl Warren because he presided over a Supreme Court that said that your white children are going to have black kids in the school with them. This is now the law. And, you had several counties that shut down their schools for more than one county shut down their public schools for, as I recall, several years. You had this campaign of massive resistance, particularly in the South, but also in Virginia and Maryland. And out of this grew this right-wing movement that says government is a terrible force. Government doesn't do things well. Government needs to be replaced by the private market. We need to replace government-run schools with private schools. We need to basically take and let's change the law so that we can go back to having a segregated society, a class society, where the working poor at the bottom, with a small middle class, because a large middle class, when 65% of us were in the middle class in the 1970s and 1980s, when a third of us had union jobs, that was just too much for the GOP. Reagan had to come in and break that one up, and he did. We're down to 45% of Americans now in the American middle class. And nobody seems to be talking about it. And the Supreme Court now is preparing to say, yes, this is the way it is, this is the way it shall be. And we're going to hand Republican-controlled states, and the Republicans are no idiots. When they started putting together these networks of right-wing radio stations, it was so cheap to buy stations in Wyoming, in Montana, in Iowa, in Utah, in Idaho, in many of your southern states. It was cheap to buy radio stations and put right-wing talk radio on there. And, boom. If you can control enough states, then you can control the country. And this is something that, the right wing figured out back in the 50s and 60s. They put together a campaign to do it. It's been very well funded to the tune of billions of dollars over the years by mostly right-wing billionaires and giant corporations. And it's tearing our country apart. It's threatening civil war. We need to get dark money out of politics. We need to reverse this awful Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, and we need to look out for more V. Harper.